Well, greetings, fellow warriors and beautiful ladies. Um, my name is excuse me. My name is Diz Laird. They used to call me Dizzy. I finally got people convinced to call me Diz, because I didn't have such a bad connotation as being called Dizzy. But, I'm only 94 years old. Um, sorry. And, I joined the Navy just a few days after Pearl Harbor. I hadn't planned on going into the service quite so soon, but it seemed like the time to go. I started my first training at the Oakland Naval Reserve Base, which is right there where the Oakland Airport is, and spent a little while there. I was a seaman second class, and finally got into flight training, and was commissioned in August of '42, and finished flight training in October. Joined my first squadron in Norfolk, Virginia, in November of '42. I was an ensign by then, and I was assigned to Fighter Squadron 4, commonly known as the Red Rippers in those days. We were assigned to the Carrier Ranger, CV4, and I don't know, might be a few here that know the Ranger, or knew it. It's no longer among us. And our first cruise was to Europe. They sent us over there, and we became part of the British Home Fleet, operating out of Scapa Flow, which was the home base for the home fleet there. And Scapa Flow is in the Orkney Islands, right on the north end of Scotland. As far as I was concerned, we wasted a whole lot of time there, because I wanted to be out in the Pacific, where I figured the Navy's air war was, and that's what I wanted to get into. We didn't do much over there. We had one decent operation. The whole time we were there, we saw 2 enemy airplanes. I happened to be the guy to find them both, and we shot them down, and we finally, that was about the only operation we had. I used to fly. I flew a lot more than anybody else. I was the only guy on the ship that came back with 100 carrier landings. The reason I got so many was because I got seasick, and I found that the only way to get over it was to get into an airplane and get airborne. And so I used to volunteer for every flight I could get, and we always had a spare plane up for every launch, and I volunteered to be the spare pilot as often as I could, and it paid off. Where most of the guys got about 60 landings on the cruise, I managed to get 100. Good. Anyway, we came back from there in December of '43. We traded in our Wildcats, which we had made the cruise with, and they provided us with brand new Hellcats. We trained for a couple of months in the States, and then went to Hawaii for another couple of months for further training, and finally we got out to the war area, and first on the USS Bunker Hill, CVA-17, and then they sent the Bunker Hill home for some repairs, and they transferred us to Essex, CV-9, and we spent the rest of our cruise on Essex. We got out there at a really lousy time as far as fighter pilots are concerned. I'm sure most of you vets, anyway, have heard about the Mariana's turkey shoot. Halsey's fleet, which we were part of then, before we got out there, Halsey's fleet took on the Japs, and they shot down, I don't know, I'm not sure how many, but I think it was well over 600 Japanese airplanes. Well, we arrived there about 3 weeks later, and there wasn't anything to shoot at, and it was very discouraging. We had 72 pilots in our squadron, and some of them were out there the whole cruise, the whole time I was, and they never saw an enemy airplane in the air. That's how scarce they were. I found a few because I had 20/10 vision, and I could see airplanes further away than anybody else in the fleet, I think. And consequently, I got to shoot down more than anybody else in our squadron. I shot down a total of 7 Japanese airplanes. 2 of them I gave away to wingmen who couldn't hit a bull in the butt with a bass fiddle. So, and but the first 2 I got were down in the Philippines on one flight, one right after the other, and I got one off Hainan Island in the South China Sea. Shot down 2 more, and when the first carrier raids up in Tokyo, I got 2 the day before. We had just sporadic raids around different places. I found two bombers wandering around and blasted both of those.
The bulge. I would love to hear from you, Martin, later. If you would I'd love to hear from you, Martin, later. So we don't want to forget about all our World War II veterans that were in Europe. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Well, after we bombed Tokyo in February of 45, of course the war got a little more serious. A couple of months later, when we invaded Okinawa, unfortunately, our outfit was sent home in the 1st of April, and we missed all that good action at Okinawa, and I was very disappointed. I tried to volunteer to stay out there. My CO would not approve it. I thought I was going to have to scrape him off the overhead. He said I was crazy and suffering combat fatigue and all kinds of things like that, and told me to get my gear together and get off the ship. Well, anyway, I stayed in the Navy. I was stationed all over the United States. I flew off of 25 different aircraft carriers, which was my favorite thing to do. I loved flying off the boat. And I made commander in 1956, January 1st, January 56. It took me 14 years to go from seaman to commander. And then I spent another 14 and a half years as a commander. They retired me in the meantime, and then kept me on active duty for another few years after I retired, because I was doing an awful lot of flying. During the Vietnamese thing, I ferried jets back and forth to Vietnam, mainly for the Marines. I'd fly new ones out to them at Da Nang and bring the old ones back for overhaul, and then ferried some of those back again. And in the meantime, I got an offer from 20th Century Fox to fly in a movie, and I had 60 days leave on the book, so I took 60 days leave, and I went to Hawaii, and I was one of the 3 principal pilots in the movie Tora Tora Tora. If you ever saw it, it was I thought it was a pretty good movie, and I had a heck of a lot of fun making it. I finally, the Navy they kicked me out after they gave me, well, we got a new chief of naval personnel, and he found out that there were 2 or 3 old commanders who had been retired. By law, we had to retire, and they kept us on active duty because they liked what we were doing. And he said, get rid of them. We don't need those old guys. So I departed the Navy, more or less on a friendly basis. And I was the only Navy ace that shot down both German and Japanese airplanes. No other ace did that at all. And I flew over 100 different models of airplanes while I was in. I was in the Navy's first jet squadron, 1947, and I flew them not exclusively, but principally for the rest of my career. And frankly, I'd still be in there if they hadn't kicked me out. Thanks for listening. I remember every one of them, almost every detail. I think the first one was kind of dramatic. It was a Ju-88 off the coast of Norway in 1943. Found him, and my section leader and I each made 2 runs on him. We set him on fire, and on the first run. The second run, I was in my firing run when he just exploded into little tiny pieces in a big ball of fire. It was a very dramatic thing. He was only right in front of me, maybe 100 yards when that happened.